Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Massal, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Some children seem to bloom with confidence, curiosity, and emotional resilience, while others' biggest struggles are anxiety and self-doubt. Some call it the luck of the draw, but it often begins at home with the bonds that we've been exposed to from the very start. Welcome back to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast. Today we're unpacking the science behind the secure attachment style and exploring some practical parenting tips for achieving this style of attachment. And joining us today is psychotherapist Erin Leonard, who has had 20 years of experience. Erin has won awards for both her professional experience as well as her well-regarded books. Additionally, Erin is also the author at a number of media outlets like the Huffington Post. So welcome to the show, Erin. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm really excited to jump into this, especially because we're going to be covering some practical parenting tips. I often hear about the secure attachment style theoretically, but it would be really nice to go into the practicality of it. I think parents often struggle with the steps of like, what's the first step? I know in theory I'm supposed to do this, but how do I even get it started? Is it too late, etc.? But before we do that, I would love to hear more about your background and what compelled you to pursue psychotherapy.
Sure. Um, well, I went to undergrad for a journalism degree, and that kind of lost its luster for me. And so I actually was in my undergrad career, I was volunteering for um, a, a child crisis line, a teen hotline, and I learned basic counseling skills and I fell in love with the field. And so I went to the University of Michigan, and at the University of Michigan, I learned a lot, but the most intriguing thing to me was a professor who talked about attachment, and he really introduced this theory to me, and I was just kind of obsessed. And so for the rest of my master's degree, I was always interested in exploring this. And then I went on for a PhD in Chicago, and I seemed to always find a way to tailor every paper back to attachment. And it was just kind of this fixation, this obsession, this passion that I had. And then I wrote my dissertation on attachment theory, and it was deemed significantly significant and then published as a book. And so it's just been this lifelong kind of passion of mine. And I write about it today. It's linked to very, very important topics like emotional intelligence and narcissism. And so it really is kind of the foundation of everything we know about modern psychology and adulthood. It all kind of goes back to attachment.
Wow, that's amazing. And from your entire span of working with attachment, researching it, teaching clients about it, what have you found to be the most common misconceptions about secure attachment, especially in the context of parenting?
Yes. So it's the phrase secure attachment is very confusing because it almost communicates that people should feel secure a lot, when in reality the people who are very aware of their insecurities are secure because they are strong enough to handle their flaws, and they're strong enough to be aware of them and grapple with them. Um, it's a profoundly insecure person who defends against knowing any flaws and then kind of projects their flaws onto other people and sees them out in the world and then feels entitled to kind of condemn, dominate, punish, or exclude. And so the phrases themselves can be kind of misleading. And especially, unfortunately, in the dating realm, a lot of people, when they're dating, they look into attachment and attachment styles. And sometimes people who are aware of their insecurities and who sometimes feel insecure in a relationship just automatically diagnose themselves with an insecure attachment style, which is counterproductive because often, the people that we are with can kind of produce insecurities in us that wouldn't be there normally just because they have an insecure attachment style, and that interacts with the secure attachment style, and it can make the secure person feel insecure.
Yeah, that's a really good introduction for our topic for today. I remember when I used to like be in the dating um, realm and how like certain people made me feel a certain way as well. And that was very confusing to me because all of the content online about attachment styles was like, if you're a secure attachment, these are your traits. If you're an insecure attachment, these are your traits. If you're an avoidant attachment, these are your traits. Which one are you? What do you need to fix? That kind of thing. And each video is always about how like what you need to do to portray yourself as a secure attachment kind of person, which was very confusing to me. So I'm really keen to get further into detail about this. But before that, I would love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Erin? My first question for you. Oh, by the way, forgot to mention this. This is a rapid fire icebreaker. So please answer in a few words, as much as possible. The first word, book.
Joy Luck Club.
Movie,
Unbroken.
podcasts.
Oh, I'm so old, I don't listen to any.
That's so fair. What about role model?
Oh gosh, role model. Margaret Atwood.
And a course or a class that you've taken that has stuck with you to this day?
Dr. Davies, University of Michigan, infant mental health.
And what is the most important lesson that you've learned from all of these?
Empathy.
Oh, that's nice. All right. Thank you for answering those. And I feel like I got to know you a bit better. So thank you for bearing with that. It's a pleasure to know you a little bit before we jump right in. Now, to start out this episode, I would love to just get some basic key definitions of a few things that might come up a little bit. A little bit. By a little bit, I mean like quite often. For starters, how would you define parenting?
Um, that's a very, I think parenting is the obligation, the responsibility to put a child's needs first, to stay emotionally attuned. I think the most important job of a parent is to obviously provide for that child's biological needs, but even more important, and I think attachment research has illuminated this, more important is to help the child know who they are and understand who they are and to see the child um, and to see who they are and to help the child know who they are.
Yeah, I think that's so beautifully put because and from what I've observed, that there's some parents that will kind of look at their children as purely just children, not as people who might have like the different facets. I think same thing goes for how children look up to their parents and kind of only view them as the parent, but not like three-dimensionally in a sense. So that's really interesting. Yeah. And what about secure attachment? What are we referring to? You mentioned before that secure attachment isn't, oh, like attachment styles in general isn't quite what people think it is. So how would you define it?
So a secure attachment is an ability to be emotionally regulated, but everyone gets angry. People, and anger is a human emotion, and when it's data that something unfair in a relationship is happening, it's very important. So and then when it's defensive and people act out on their anger destructively, it can be a problem. But children who are emotionally regulated, of course, they fall out sometimes emotionally, but they can say sorry and they can glean insight and they can collaborate, and they can be open to ideas, and they have empathy. And so a secure attachment really is established between, believe it or not, this is hard to believe, but 0 to 2, it really is. And so when an infant comes into this world, they're hardwired to attach neurologically, physiologically, biologically, genetically. And though that research was founded in studies with goslings and ducklings and imprinting, and they realized that human babies come in neurologically healthy babies come in hardwired to attach. And so they do many things across cultures to attract a caregiver and to maintain a caregiver's care and attention. And when a caregiver responds empathically and consistently, that baby feels safe, and they feel loved, and they feel worthwhile. And that's a very important thing. And what happens is the mirroring and the empathy, they actually integrate and internalize those experiences, and then are capable of mirroring and empathizing as they get older. But a baby who's kept in prolonged states of distress for routinely for very long periods of time, is in such emotional discomfort that unconsciously they resurrect defense mechanisms. And those unconscious defense mechanisms, keep anything from hurting them, hurting their ego and their self-esteem, their identity. And so basically that can show up later in adulthood in lots of pretty profound defense mechanisms like deflection, projection, distortion, denial, and really some pretty extreme ones. And then you have a securely attached infant who obviously, everyone has defense mechanisms, has sort of more benign defense mechanisms like repression, suppression. And the way that I explain this a lot, this vignette helps a lot of people understand that. Say you have first graders that are in a line on their way into the classroom after recess, right? And Sally's in line, and something happens in the line, and she's thrown from the line, and she flies back and hits her head on the ground, right? She jumps up and says, "Oh my gosh, like that hurt. Who did that?" Right? And then you have Sally, who she gets thrown back from line, and she gets up and she charges the line to knock everyone over because she's so mad. And so those are kind of the two differences between emotionally regulated and emotionally dysregulated. In the example A, Sally gets up and says her feelings. I'm so upset. I'm so mad. Who did that to me? Right? She can identify how she feels, that hurt. And then in the example B, that Sally gets up and charges without even explaining or identifying or articulating. She's immediately acting on her feelings in a destructive way because she can't emotionally regulate. And so people think that if people get loud, or they, are very expressive or emotional, that they're emotionally dysregulated. Not true. When you can articulate how you feel, you are automatically emotionally regulated. When you have a knee jerk defensive response, I'm hurt, I automatically hurt you. That is emotionally dysregulated. So it's very nuanced, and I know the terms seem kind of confusing, but it's things like these that we really have to think about, because it's super important. Because if we slap a label on someone, or if we don't explain the details of something, very often people are very hard on themselves, and then they end up, maybe not exploiting their emotional intelligence or their empathy the way that they can and they should, because they're so worried about who they are.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. A beautiful explanation. I'm also curious about, you mentioned that the phase of 0 to 2 years is critical in forming an attachment style. But when it comes to 2 years and beyond, how much of a part does that play in forming an attachment? For example, if a parent's toddler, like within the years of 0 to 2 years old, um, they were left alone for a really long time, neglected, that would play a critical role in their attachment style. But 2 years and beyond, let's say, I don't know, the parents, one of them is retrenched from their job and manages to stay at home. Now the kid has a lot more attention. So, how much of a role does that play in how the attachment develops?
Sure. So it is. So if there's a secure attachment. So from 0 to 2, there's comforting, there's soothing, there's empathy, there's empathic responses, there's attunement. So primary caregiver is very attuned to the cues of the baby and responds appropriately. No parent is perfect, obviously, and kids are resilient. But for the most part, if they're able to, respond, and there's not prolonged traumatic separations or anything like that. The 2-year-old will have, sometimes will develop a secure attachment. And what happens is, with a secure attachment, they are able to say how they feel. Now at 2, they're not. And so 2-year-olds naturally act out, how they feel. At 3, they can say how they feel. But a 2-year-old with a secure attachment style will get to that point where at 3 they can say how they feel and they can identify how they feel. I'm mad, mom. I'm sad. I'm, and um but a child with a secure attachment ends up being very resilient. So even if they run into one parent who's emotionally mistreating them or emotionally abusive, they often feel the repercussions, but eventually they are able to talk about it and say how they feel. And because they can deal with and grapple with deep and uncomfortable emotions that have to do with their self-esteem and identity, they have a stronger chance of accessing support and getting help and recovering because they can process through the troubling experiences. And that's a big deal because it leads to resilience, and it leads to recovery from even traumatic events post 2, post 3, lifelong, really. And really, kids who have a secure attachment, they have this defense mechanism, and it can be a problem, but it's I it's very neurologically programmed and psychologically programmed and physiologically and biologically. They have this defense mechanism, and I like to call it, it's my fault, right? And so in order to protect their attachment figure, if they have a problematic attachment figure, in order to protect that attachment bond, they will kind of make things their fault. So you've heard the examples of a child thinking that, because they had a messy room and dad found out and he got mad, that he divorced mom, right? And so there's this child kind of makes things their fault to continue loving the attachment figure. And then there's another type of child who does not have a secure attachment style, who identifies with the aggressor. They identify with the aggressor because it's so hard to feel small already as a child, and in the midst of chaos and violence and graphic stuff, they can't feel any smaller. So then they identify with the powerful person who happens to be the abuser. So when they identify with the aggressor, then later in life they become the aggressor. And so really, a lot happens in childhood, and a lot can happen to a securely attached child who, may suffer trauma and maybe, another attachment figure that's problematic. But what happens is, they have the chance of recovery because they can talk about it, they can identify it, they can grapple with it, and they can recover from it.
Yeah, thanks for enlightening us on how the attachment styles develop throughout a child a child's journey. I guess I don't know how else to put it, a journey. But you were mentioning about how, like, there can be differences in different kids and how their attachments develop, regardless of like whether they went through the same thing or not. How much does like personality or like innate traits play a role in that development?
I would say that if a child has a secure attachment, they're on their way to emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is really a gift, but in some situations it can be problematic because they may be their empathy may be exploited. Their ability to see the positive and the good may be taken advantage of. And when they meet a certain type of personality, those qualities may be exploited. But really, a secure attachment leads to very healthy development. It leads to, deep and creative thought. It leads to emotional intelligence in adulthood. And now I think as a culture, we're kind of recognizing how important emotional intelligence is. And all the research shows that medical professionals who are emotionally intelligent heal their patients more efficiently and more quickly than a doctor or any medical professional without emotional intelligence. We're seeing how beneficial it is in the workplace in terms of retaining employees, boosting morale, creating a safe work environment where people can focus and, you know, building team cohesiveness. We're seeing it. We're seeing how important emotional intelligence is, across the map professionally. And I think that is a very important thing because it will, if we're looking at emotional intelligence and how to develop it, we're going to go right back to secure attachment and how do we cultivate a secure attachment in our children. And I think sometimes a lot of people confuse empathy with sympathy. And so this gentle parenting approach, which is fine, often parents go, okay, well, I'm supposed to fix it, or I'm supposed to feel sorry for my child, or I'm supposed to, pity them. And what happens is then, if they do that, they start enabling and fixing, and they create this victim mentality or sense of entitlement in the child. And they don't mean to, but it happens. But if parents really know what empathy is, which is honor feelings corrects behaviors. Never correct behaviors or honor, never correct feelings and honor behaviors. You always want to honor feelings and correct behaviors. And it's as simple as saying, you're mad. I get it. I would be too, honey, but we don't throw our backpack. You need to go pick that up. Right. It's as simple as that. And then the child goes, oh, that is what I'm feeling. I am mad. And that is okay. But throwing my backpack isn't. Okay. And it registers in them like how I can trust how I feel. I can believe in what I feel. I can believe in my intuition. I just have to act appropriately. I can't act on my feelings destructively. And so really I think the most important thing for parents to know is that the never confuse empathy with sympathy. And, fixing is not good. Understanding is good. Understanding and then upholding expectations and rules and boundaries, that's good. Sympathizing and fixing or enabling, not great.
Yeah, there's still like a group of parents for sure that tends to like avoid emotions as much as possible. For example, I think it's like a cultural thing sometimes as well. Like my parents are always very averse to hearing anything negative, so any crying, anything like that, is like a hard no when I was growing up. Was a hard no when I was growing up, actually even now, but that's okay. But so what I'm getting at is for those parents who are unconvinced, what would you say is the most what would you say are the important considerations when it comes to understanding how secure attachments develop, especially when it comes to parenting?
Sure. I think it's really, really important to listen for feelings. So there's, kids say a lot. There's a lot going on. They're gonna blah 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 blah, right? And parents are like, there's a time crunch. Every parent, every time, every minute counts. There's too much to do in a day, and so they just want to get the factual stuff done. They want to get business taken care of, so everyone can go to bed on time and get a good night's sleep and get up and eat a healthy breakfast, right? And so, but there's so much focus on that parents often forget to listen for a feeling. When a child is talking, it's important to listen for the feeling. You're frustrated. I get it. I would be too. But honey, I think that maybe you should have remembered that, to follow the rules or, so you're always kind of listening for the feeling underneath, even even a feeling that you don't want to hear. So this is really important and I use this example a lot because I feel like it really drills home the point of listening for feelings. So my daughter years and years and years ago was going to a pool party and I kind of found her lying in our bathroom floor like weeping, like the kind of crying, like the heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching kind of crying and I went in and I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's are you okay? What's happening?" And she just said to me like, "Mom, I hate the way my belly looks in my bathing suit. I don't know if I can go to this like no one looks like me. I'm the only one." And of course I know, listen for a feeling, honor the feeling. And I just looked at her and I said, like, honey, it hurts not to like the way you look. It hurts. And I get that. And I've been there. And she looked at me and she goes, "Well, but you're thin." And I said, "Yeah, but honey, I worry about my wrinkles all the time." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, you do, mom." I have 10 wrinkle creams on my counter, right? Like, right? And
Yeah.
she's like, "Oh my gosh." And so right then, I didn't want her to feel like that about her body. But I also know that I don't want her to feel alone in it, and that how she feels is very human, and I can relate, and I felt it too. And so, and that's all she needed. It wasn't about, it wasn't really about fixing it or getting a better bathing suit. And I held her for a little while and talked to her for a little while. And eventually, I said, "All right, what are we doing? We're going to go to Target and get a cover up? Or are we going to go to Abby's house and get another bathing suit?" And she just said, "Actually, I think I'm okay. I'm ready. Like, can you hurry up? Because we're late." I'm like, "Okay, well, here we go." So, it's just a very important example about it may not be a feeling that the parent wants to hear, but if they reject it and dismiss it and punish the child for expressing it, the child is left alone with it. And that is not what you want. You want the child to feel like, okay, I can tell my mom something, my dad something, and they're gonna really try to understand. And we have different experiences than our children because it's totally different generations, but really we all feel the same feels. And really connecting with that and understanding it is really important.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that anecdote. I feel like that's something that a lot of people need to learn how to do. I myself, like, I'm not a parent by any stretch at all. That's yeah, I don't have a child. But when it comes to like relationships, I think that's something I personally can do better at as well. Even as a friend or a partner. Um, yeah, so I want to know more about the long term benefits of secure attachment for a child's mental health, resilience, and etc. What does the research tell us about that?
So, a secure attachment is the predictor of emotional intelligence in adulthood, and an insecure, avoidant attachment is the predictor of narcissism in adulthood. So, there's strong correlation, um, and it makes a lot of sense because emotionally intelligent people are usually very empathic. They are um, self aware. They're very concerned with how their actions and words impact other people, and they long to get along with people, and they long to um, have a good relationship with people or have a good rapport. And the more narcissistic people are very defensive, and they do not, they're very unaware of how their actions and words impact others, and it really is a very defensive approach to life. And so and they really want control in relationships. They don't really want closeness. And so an emotionally intelligent person fights for a bond and fights to understand and fights to talk about feelings, that because feelings really are the nuts and bolts of every relationship. And if you're not talking about feelings, um, you don't have much closeness. And so, really, it's very important because a secure attachment is really something that will produce a lot of positivity and strong relationships and strong bonds and happiness, and really in our culture. And if we don't promote that, it can be very difficult. And if people get empathy confused with sympathy, it's a very dangerous thing to do because they're instilling a victim mentality where nothing is this person's fault, and they walk through life thinking nothing is. And that can be destructive to their relationships and to their professional life, and to a lot of other things. So
Yeah.
also emotionally intelligent people have a strong moral compass, and so they really do care deeply about human beings and about the plight of others. And so and they do things because they're driven by a need to help or to heal or to correct what they've done or to correct any damage that they've done or a mistake. Whereas if you are more of a narcissistic person, you're more regulated by avoiding a consequence. And so you don't want to get fired, or you don't want to fine, and so it's driven more by avoiding consequences than it is about doing the right thing for the people around you.
Yeah, it sounds like, because I don't think that many people kind of fall like strictly under one category. It sounds more like a bit of a spectrum depending on like what kind of consequence you're faced with, or what kind of interaction you're going through, who like what party is involved, and how what their behaviors are. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Like is it a spectrum of some sort, or
Yeah, I think, well, narcissism is an unconscious defense mechanism. So when we feel small, one defense mechanism that is enacted is to act kind of big. Right, and so and that's a and also and so narcissists, they do that a lot, right? They act very big when they feel very small. But narcissism as a whole is an unconscious defense mechanism, and on the other end of the spectrum, an emotionally intelligent person can act a little bit narcissistically because it's human, and so, they may have a selfish moment. They may have a moment where, they trip over their own ego, right? All that stuff is very human, very normal. And also there is it's very human to feel very good about validation from the world about things that our parents didn't see in us, right? So our attachment figures missed that, we have a lot of inner strength or that we have tenacity. And so, when the world says, "Oh, look at you," and validates that thing that a parent missed, you're like, "Oh my gosh, like this is the best thing ever." And it's like almost like intoxicating. So, everyone has an ego, and everyone sometimes needs fuel for that ego. It depends on how much that ego runs your life. And if you keep your ego in check, and sometimes you trip over it now and again, but you do walk with humility and accountability, and you try to repair mistakes, and you own your stuff, and you say, I always say, like, the most intelligent thing that I hear emotionally intelligent people say is, "I was wrong." Like, I was
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah, and you don't hear that on the other end, and so, if you're a person who says, "I was wrong," or, "I'm sorry, I had a selfish moment," or, "Gosh darn it, I got caught up in this and it's not okay. So sorry. I got too big for my britches." Like, if you're a person who says that type of thing, you're emotionally intelligent, and it's a gift.
Offering myself up as an example, which by the way, I actually do find this very embarrassing to share, so please be kind with me. But I think anyone who's been a long time listener of the podcast would know that, like, it's a recurring theme. I share this with guests all the time when it comes to like relevant things like parenting and stuff. But my parents weren't so open emotionally when I was a child, and even now, and would often like encourage me to avoid feeling any negative emotions, any like anger, any sadness, anything like that. Just avoid is kind of the thing that I was taught. And like what you shared, I grew up into adulthood kind of like finding ways to get that external validation that I didn't get as a child. So sharing this because for any parents who are curious about what some potential like unintended consequences might be, this is it. And I'm curious to know, like, what are some specific moments or like types of interactions that could have played a part in building secure attachments? You mentioned an example earlier on about sharing with your child that you have your own insecurities as well, that everybody goes through such things. So I'm curious to know, like, apart from comforting each other after some distressing moments or anything like that, what are some other events that could be, I guess, monumental in a child's attachment development journey?
Sure. Um, I think parents today get very worried that their self-esteem is at jeopardy, and so if they don't make a soccer team, or if they don't score a goal, or if they don't do something like that, that they're going to quit. And so they end up focusing really a lot on achievement. And that for a parent is an immediate outcome, like, I'm doing a good job, I'm not doing a good job. And so this focus on, the child's achievements, and are they successful, and are they going to be successful, really, really can distract a parent from what's really important, which is helping them through the hard times and the disappointments. And so you never want to protect your child from a disappointing event. You want to be there for them when the disappointment happens. And it can't be about you being disappointed, and it can't be about your ego. And so it's really important, like my son, after a horrible baseball tryout where he was humiliated, didn't want to talk about anything that night. And then he came into my bedroom that night and said, I'm not, and he was 10, and it's important to be strong and powerful at 10. There's a lot of bravado in boys at that age. And he said, I'm not strong or powerful, mom. I'm not. And I had to look at him and go, I know. I know how that feels. I know how that feels. And I get it, and I get it. But honey, you are tough and you are fast, just like your papa. And so, I had to honor the feelings and then give him a reframe. But being there for him, and hearing him and honoring his feelings and then helping him reframe it to, you may not be strong and powerful at this point, but you are faster and tougher than anyone I know. And that's going to carry you much further in life. And especially when you grow up and you get the muscles that the other kids have early. So I guess that's important. This focus on achievement is not productive. It's focus on character, effort, thoughtfulness, w- teamwork, distributing the ball, not going automatically to score the goal. The effort on character instead of achievement is very important. And then being there for your child and the disappointments, even when you're hurting for them, because they're hurting, that is a parent's most important job.
Yeah, and I kind of yeah, I think that a lot of parents also struggle with that themselves. Like maybe they didn't get this kind of attention and thoughtfulness from their own parents, and so it's kind of like intergenerational trauma almost, or like attitudes or behaviors at the very least, right? And yeah, and on top of that, parents are going through a lot of stress, work life balance challenges, mental health issues of their own. So I like, while I can be pretty critical of my own parents, for example, for like, being emotionally avoidant, etc. Um, I do have to admit that parents do deal with a lot to while raising a child. So, what is your advice for parents who are managing all of these struggles and really struggling to prioritize their children's emotional needs because I don't know, bills come first, rent comes first. The more like hard needs come first. Yeah, what's
Mhm.
your advice for that?
Um, Nothing's quicker and more healing than empathy. So not you could spend the afternoon with your child fishing for 4 hours and it'd be fine. But nothing heals quicker than a child feeling heard and understood. And it doesn't mean you have to bend rules or break rules or bend expectations or, but it's the most healing way to, and it's the most efficient, quickest way to stay close to your child. And a child that is close to a parent, their mental health is far, far better than a child who doesn't have a close relationship with a parent. So I would say, even if you're so busy, the most important thing to do is stop and understand and honor how they feel.
Yeah. And for parents who are listening, who may have felt like they've made mistakes in the past after listening to what we've shared today, and are worrying that they may have hindered their child's attachment style in some sort of way. What advice do you have for starting now?
It's never too late. Never. And no parent is perfect. We all make mistakes. We all make terrible mistakes. And we all have selfish moments and we all get consumed and we miss stuff. And that is so okay because we can never be perfect. And part of making mistakes as a parent and being human as a parent is showing your child, like, telling them, "I made a mistake. I was wrong here, and I'm so sorry." And that child will internalize that experience, and then they will be able to say to you one day, "I was wrong, mom. I'm sorry." And so, showing your humanness, owning your mistakes, and it's never too late to say sorry, and it's never too late to repair a mistake. And kids are a lot of kids are very forgiving. There's a certain type of very defensive child that's not. And that type plays the victim. And so parents need to be very careful of that too. when a child expresses a feeling, or is trying to express a feeling, that's important. But if they're talking about how hard they have it in order to get out of a taking responsibility for themselves, that's more of a victim mentality. That doesn't need empathy. That needs a firm approach. But I would say to parents that we all do terrible things as parents. Honestly, we're human and we get frustrated and we're overwhelmed, and it happens, and sometimes we forget, and but it's never ever 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 too late to own a mistake with your child.
Yeah, that leads into my next question pretty well. I wanted to ask about different attachment needs and how temperament or innate personality may have a may have a effect on a child's behavior and attitude and general attachment style. What is your advice for parents adapting their approach according to the child's temperament?
Um, it's interesting because you do have to kind of, as a parent, you have to personalize your approach, right? So one kid might respond to humor and kind of a humorous approach, and another child may need a more kind of serious approach. And so it's very important to just really listen to the cues of your child and also listen to your intuition as a parent. So if you feel like something's wrong, follow up, right? If you don't feel if you feel like your child responds to a lot of humor, keep making them laugh. If you feel like your child needs more serious discussions once in a while and one-on-one time, do that. But in developmentally, a child is going to need very different things as they progress through their childhood. And so teenagers need more privacy and they need more kind of reassurance, but and they need more independence, but they need it's teenagers can be very deceptive because they're very needy because they're going through an identity kind of reconsolidation process, but they also need their independence, and so they're very private and they're prickly, and so it's hard to read a teenager. And so really reading about child development and teenage development is very important. you know Kids in middle childhood just adore their parents. They think they're the greatest people on earth. They're still their heroes, and so exploit the heck out of that. And when children are very young, it requires a lot of hard work, but that's the time to really invest, and it's magical. And if you can view those young years as magical, and you can see your child as magical because they are, it really is like it's the most incredible time. So I guess I would say, knowing kind of developmentally where your child is at will help you know what is normal and what is not in terms of their behaviors. And that is so helpful. When I say to a parent in my office, oh, yeah, that's pretty normal for their age, they're like, like, thank God, I didn't know. And so, really, a parent who's kind of up on child development has a leg up on what's kind of normal and what's not.
And what's one key takeaway you'd give to parents who want to prioritize secure attachments?
Empathy. Empathy is usually the answer, and it doesn't mean you're giving in, bending the rules. It doesn't mean anything, but it just means that, it's mostly the answer to every conflict or disagreement or disruption is really trying to understand their feelings, and then what comes next is what comes next. You follow through, uphold expectations, problem solve, reassure, whatever comes next is whatever comes next. But a child who feels understood, you can take their perspective for a minute just to understand better. And then you go back to your parenting, perspective. That child is going to trust you and they're going to open up. And a child who can open up and talk about their feelings is a child that's going to be safe, and a child that's mental health is going to be pretty solid.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of your expertise with us.
Oh
I
my
think
gosh,
it's
yes.
yeah, it's been really insightful, and I appreciate the anecdotes as well. Now let's move on to the break segment. Today we're doing questions from the internet. This is where I will pose some burning questions from netizens to an expert, which is Erin here today, for their insight and advice. So the first question I have here is: does sending your child to daycare damage, so to speak, secure attachment?
So basically that depends. So if the child is exhibiting signs of distress, prolonged distress. So say they get to daycare and they don't bond with a consistent daycare person, or and so they're not eating, they're not drinking, they're crying for hours. If this con- continues for days, the parent has to intervene and has to figure out something, right? But if the child goes and they don't exhibit signs of distress, and they're bonded, maybe they have a sibling with them, or maybe they have, a daycare person who really, parent or bonds with them like similar to their parent, and they don't show any signs of distress. But if the child goes to daycare and doesn't eat or drink for 3 days and cries the whole time, you really have to like intervene and figure it out.
Yeah. And does sleep training affect secure attachment?
I think that it's very important in infancy to really comfort and soothe a child. And a child who is comforted and soothed, um, I think will settle down and eventually kind of be able to soothe themselves. And so if you're doing sleep training and it's drastic, the child is expected to soothe themselves, and that doesn't work. That's what attachment is helping the baby regulate by being there and soothing and comforting. And so, it depends on how drastic and extreme the approach is. Kids are very resilient, and kids with a secure attachment are very resilient. And so, yeah, it's not going to harm a child to, if they have to cry for, a little bit. But I would say the more drastic kind of approach, where the child is expected to soothe themselves for hours at a time and never responded to, and they're in an extreme state of distress, I don't think that's a good I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So, what is your advice for? This is not an actual question, but just to follow up on this one, um, what is your advice for a parent who is considering sleep training, but isn't sure? Like, should they do it? Should they not? What are some things to take into account here?
I think the most important thing is that baby is responded to consistently and soothed and comforted. And, I think um sleep is so important to the health of parents and baby and family, but those are situations you can never take back, and you can never get back. And so if you have an infant and you need to hold them a lot and soothe them a lot, and it happens to be at night, I would say just do a reframe and enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay. Last one here. I'm worried I went overboard with attachment parenting. For context, my son is now 20 months old and I'm a stay at home mom. I've been focused on creating a secure attachment with him his whole life, and he used to be outgoing. Now he doesn't like being near other kids, isn't friendly with other adults, and doesn't like to walk out in public. Did I mess up, or is this just a phase?
Okay. Yeah. So between 18 months and usually 20 months, children go through this weird insecure attachment, or I misspoke. I'm sorry. Separation anxiety thing. So it's like it's just weird. It's like 18 months. Why are they experiencing separation anxiety now? But it is just a thing. And so I think she's doing fine. I think it's just that weird developmental thing where at 18 months they have this weird separation anxiety. It will resolve. Tell her she's fine.
You're fine.
I think she's fine. I think she's fine.
Yeah. No, like, I mean, yeah, it's weird, right? Because, like, not to, because I have done this historically, like, in other, like, episodes as well, but, like, my cat also had a separation anxiety phase. Um, yeah, but it's just so weird because, like, I would leave, and the whole time he would be meowing at my door, and like neighbors could hear, and anytime like a friend came over, they could they could hear from like the hallway as well. So like it isn't exclusive to babies, I suppose, and like it happens with even with like pets. Not to equate human babies to cats. Okay, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. Like sometimes like your child just goes through separation anxiety, and yeah. So what's your advice for the separation anxiety bit?
So usually it's because they're going okay, so children, babies, they have a little bit of separation anxiety before they are doing this huge next developmental leap. And it makes sense, right? Because emotionally and psychologically, they're getting ready for the next developmental leap. And at 18 months, they really are getting ready to kind of like the independence explodes, right? Walking, talking, they're out in the world more, they're out, they're doing all the things. And so I think it's a very developmentally um an understandable thing, honestly. And it resolves on its own. And so she should just reassure and follow the baby's cues and try and get out in the world with the 20-month-year-old, like, and explore and get them distracted and take them to botanical gardens or a children's museum and really like be there and help them really explore and encourage it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of that and answering netizens' questions with us. If you enjoyed this, we do more of that on some of our other episodes as well. So continue posting on the internet and hopefully we'll find you at some point. Now we'll move on to practices and habits, which is where we talk about the more practical day-to-day application of what Erin has just shared with us. So my first question for you here is what are the most important behaviors or practices that parents should adopt to foster secure attachments with their children?
Sure. I think it's really important to stay calm. And it's very important to take the child's perspective for a minute. It doesn't mean that you give up your perspective as a parent because you can never do that. But if you just kind of set aside your adult perspective for a minute and try and look at it through a child's eyes and through a child's perspective, it really helps you get in sync with that child emotionally and then kind of help that child along. So, it's very important to help a child with hard feelings and negative feelings. And so, not giving into them or enabling them, but really trying to see things from their perspective, understand it, and then get in sync with that child, communicate an understanding, and then really encourage the child to do what they need to do.
Yeah, that sounds basically like how you would communicate with like anyone like ever as well. Like if you have a disagreement with someone, you try to like understand from their point of view what's going on, and then kind of speak more in their language. Maybe not like you don't have to do the full 180 like literally like method acting, right? But like at the very least like trying to see their perspective is so transformative in how the like what the outcome is and how they respond next, and how you respond as well. So what is your advice for like breaking that practice down into simple steps? Yeah.
So this is something I say to parents every day. Less is more. So, instead of lecturing, teaching, talking, you really, the lecturing, the teaching, the talking, like I know everything. This I'm going to explain to you 5 reasons why, and you lose a child within the first 3 words. So I always tell parents, less is more. Talk less. Like try to communicate in 3 or 4 words or less because the child, you lose the child and you're intellectualizing and you're putting distance between you and the child. And so really less teaching, less lecturing, less words.
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I was a child, and anytime I got lectured by my parents after, like, I don't know, like being upset about something or what have you, I would totally just tune out and be like, oh my gosh, mom doesn't understand again. Like, there's no use in, like, you know what I mean? Like that teenage rage. Um, yeah. So, I would love to know, like, what are some, like, in your practice or, like, maybe in real life too, what are some, like, challenges or struggles that parents tend to face when they try to do this?
Yeah. Sometimes, eh, if you have a child who doesn't have a secure attachment and is extraordinarily defensive and plays the victim a lot, and that can happen because children obviously want to get what they want. And so if they can get what they want manipulatively, they're going to go for it. And if you kind of buy into the victim mentality, you're fueling that and then you're kind of creating a monster, right? And so for parents, it's really important to distinguish between a child expressing a feeling or trying to express a feeling and a child who is trying to get out of taking responsibility for themselves by saying that they had a hardship or that life is harder for them than anyone else. And so the difference is very very important to distinguish. And the child who is expressing a feeling or they're having trouble with a feeling, that's important. But a child is just saying that their life is harder than everyone else's, so they don't have to take responsibility for hitting Joey in the parking lot. Eh, that's more of a victim mentality.
Yeah, I remember I have a friend who does have a child who's kind of like that, and the stories I hear about how the child plays into the victim mentality a lot. Like, for example, they hit another schoolmate at school, and then came home, cried about how, like, I think they said something they didn't like or something like that, and refused to take accountability for it. And it just sounds like a really hard thing to deal with. Are there any, like, habits or practices that the parent can um, exercise on their own, to help with the the stress of dealing with that, and to I suppose just like training a little bit of patience for that, because it sounds like a lot.
Yeah, I think it's very important to tell the child, like, you're not the victim here. You did this. You got to, as a parent, you have to stay on task. Like, you have to stay focused on what they did, right? If you're addressing a really problematic behavior, if you buy into this, oh, but this has happened and this happened and this happened and this is, and my dog got was sick and so I was frustrated, so I hit Joey. Like, the parent really has to say, "Hey, we're not talking about any of that. You hit Joey. That's what we're focusing on. You're not the victim. Joey's the victim." You kind of just call a spade a spade. Like, you're not the victim here. Joey's the victim, right? Now if there's more to it, like if that child was being bullied and defending themselves, fine, that's fine. But if the child is really playing the victim to get out of taking responsibility for themselves, the parent needs to just say, call a spade and say, nope, you really hurt someone here and it's not okay. And you're making a lot of excuses to try and not own it, but I need you to own it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of that with us. It's been a really enlightening episode, and I hope that it's brought some usefulness to people as well. Now, let's go into the open mic segments. This is where you'll get to talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor's yours, Erin. Take it away.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I did write a book on narcissism and emotional intelligence and how attachment styles kind of predict each one, and then how sort of emotionally intelligent people and narcissistic people have this sort of chemistry that can be very destructive, and how emotionally intelligent people sort of have these vulnerabilities to a more narcissistic person and a more narcissistic profile. And I love that book, and I think it incorporates everything that I love: attachment, empathy, emotional intelligence, and, how to really deal with narcissistic profiles, because sometimes they can really get control of your life and wreak havoc. So that's my book. And then it's called How to Outsmart a Narcissist, Use Emotional Intelligence to Regain Control at Home, at Work, and in Life.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'd love to see it for myself as well. Um, and if our listeners want to find out more about where to get this book, what work you do, etc., connect with you, where can they find you?
So I have a professional TikTok, so it's Dr. Erin Leonard, and I have a website, drerinleonard.com, and I own a practice, Recore Counseling, and I post a lot of stuff on my Recore Counseling website. I have an Instagram, and I have some other things that my son runs, and I don't really. That's all I know. I just give him my content, and he posts it.
Oh, that's adorable, little family-run business.
Yes,
I love that. Thank you
you
so much,
gotta.
Erin.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, you were saying.
I was just gonna say you gotta use them while you can. While they're still under your roof, you gotta exploit those kids.
You got a freaking child labor, like
That's
my
right.
yeah. Thank you so much, Erin, for joining us today. I've had such a good time learning more about secure attachments. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Erin, is there anything else that you like to leave with our listeners?
No, if anyone has any questions, I'm at drerinleonard dot com, and or sorry, drerinleonard at outlook.com. And so if anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm happy to respond.
Amazing. We'll leave all of that in the show note. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs. a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.